Hello everybody and welcome to the video where we're going to talk about various aspects of the RALE Sandpaper subproject. But first we're going to get started with a quick tutorial on how to get set up from scratch, followed by a quick demo of the product itself. So to get started, all you're going to need is your Chrome, a Chrome window, and a command line, a command shell. So to get started, first we are just going to navigate to the Delta Lab GitHub. We're going to go to the Sandpaper repository. You can see the link up here. So we're just going to go down. We're just going to copy this to our clipboard. Very simple. We're going to go to our documents. We're going to git clone this link. And basically what this is, it's a Chrome extension, and everything you need is going to be in the Sandpaper folder that gets cloned. You're going to follow up. I'm going to go to Chrome extensions. And it's important to enable developer mode, as this will allow you to load an unpacked extension from the folder. So just to show where we are, here we're in documents. This is a Sandpaper repo that we just cloned. We're going to go ahead and select it, and that's it. It's installed into our instance of Chrome. Awesome. So now that we have our Chrome extension installed, we are going to do two quick examples that sort of just show how it works. So if you want to pull up the repository in whatever IDE, I've used Atom here, I'm just going to go ahead and pull it up. Our example site is index.html, and here we have two buttons. And what happens is when you press these buttons, the background color changes. The script that it links to back here, you see these two functions are identical, except that they're differently named. And all they do is they change the background color of the function. So now that we are familiar with that, let's go back and go ahead and actually pull up this page. I'm going to go to index. I have used this already, so I have it sort of in my history, but as you can see, it's just the path all the way up to the Sandpaper folder, up to the index.html file. I'm going to go here. I'm going to go ahead and press these buttons, and as we said before, it's just going to go ahead and change the background color of our functions. We're going to pull up our Sandpaper application. And what we're going to do is we're going to, as you can see, there's some outlining. What it does is it allows you to see the component that you want to isolate, and we'll see how this comes in handy later. When you double press it, it will isolate it, which it doesn't do anything because it's already its own component. But here, it's going to list all the functions that it sees in the global sort of window object. In this case, we have our change color 1 and our change color 2 function. I'm going to go ahead and disable this. It's going to give us some feedback. When I press it, you can see it actually straight up just says there is not a function, and this is our indicator that it's working. So we can do the same thing when we change color 2, we're going to disable it, and the nice thing is we can actually just go ahead and re-enable these, so when I press them, our functionality now exists. So what it does is it takes these functions, makes it null, stores that function away, and we want to restore it, just brings it back in. So that's the first example using sort of this Sandpaper using this sandbox environment. Awesome. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to show an actual real-world example. If you go to W3 Schools JavaScript, go to JavaScript examples and navigate to writing into a window alert box. So basically it's a very straightforward example. It pops up an alert with a number. We press a button, we see we get our desired functionality. Our goal here is to see which JavaScript function is responsible for this behavior. So we're going to pull up our Sandpaper app, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and isolate this component. And when we press the button again, we see that there's no alert. Instead, it's saying cannot set property inner HTML of null. So this is kind of sort of a limitation of the way we've implemented things. When we isolate a component, we actually end up stripping away all the HTML that isn't directly relevant. So if you have any functions that have that as a dependency, that functionality will be broken. Luckily, we don't need this to actually show the functionality of our app. It's something that could be improved in a future iteration. What's important to note is that while it's throwing up an error, the function itself exists and is being run. Now to isolate this, we're going to go through our list of functions and try and figure out if we can disable a function that controls this button. Here, this is submit it, try it. It seems like a pretty good candidate. So when we disable it, we press the button, you see we get a different kind of error message than we had before. submit try it is not a function. So that's a cue that we've disabled the proper function for this button. And so we press it again, we can actually re-enable it. We'll run it. It will give us the same error. Again, the error is not because the function does not exist. It's because we've, again, trimmed away some relevant part of HTML. But the point of this demo shows that we can use the Sandpaper app to selectively enable and disable functions to make it easier to link the function name to the actual desired functionality. So with those demos in mind, I'd like to shift gears a little and start to talk about our motivations and the research questions behind this project. So our motivations, the Sandpaper project is a sub-project of the RALE project. RALE stands for Readily Available Learning Experiences, and the purpose is to take real-world examples and turn them into something that somebody with a reasonable amount of web development experience can learn. Our goal here, our specific goal in this case, is to make component isolation easier. So the HTML and CSS aspects, as you can see here with the sort of isolation, have already been well covered. So we've simply merged that work into ours and done some exploration on the JavaScript direction with the sort of the sandboxing thing. So basically, our research question is basically this. How can the benefits of tinkering be used to improve the ability of reasonably experienced web developers in pinpointing relevant JavaScript for an isolated component? So basically, for our example, like we had before, this is the isolated component. I want to know, what JavaScript controls this button. Our research is sort of headed in the direction of how can we facilitate that process. So now on the issue of need finding, ultimately a significant amount of need finding was vital to picking the direction of this sub-project. And most of the results of the need finding can be found in my design log, which are both linked to from the feedback page and also exist just under the DTR. Let's see if I can expand this, under the SIG folder for the RALE project under my personal folder. It's in the design log. To basically summarize the need finding, the two components that it take is the paper reading and the interviews that I've conducted over the quarter. So the papers, using learning analytics, denim, and non-programmers identifying functionality in unfamiliar code were all very useful. To summarize, the main takeaways, as summarized here, one is that tinkering and interactivity is vital to understanding. Two is that understanding is helped move forward a lot by removing code rather than adding it. And three is that a systemic understanding is very vital to sort of an understanding of a component. And this was actually reiterated with the interviews that I did. We had people recreate components, and it seemed like people who tried to work with a high-level understanding did better than people who straight up looked at the source and tried to recreate it like one for one. Even when the people who had high-level understandings did not even look at the code. Just having a clear mental model seemed to be very helpful to them. So the hypothesis there is that a tool that helps people understand these functionalities doesn't necessarily have to be incredibly fine-grained. It just sort of has to approximate that. So on the matter of this, there was still the problem of obviously any sort of inspection tool is something that Chrome developer tools can already do, right? There's no additional functionality from, or not necessarily no, but it's significantly more difficult to have an inspection tool that gives you the functionality that Chrome developer tools doesn't already give you. So I noticed during my interviews that a lot of people struggled with trying to get rid of extraneous stuff, right? Trying to figure out what exactly is useful and what's not. So in the end, we combine all this research and need finding to basically go in a direction of creating a component to strip HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. After talking with Josh, it seemed like most of the HTML and CSS work is A, sort of already done, and also B, quite easy to do programmatically, or at least able to do heuristically. It seems in that case that we decided to move forward with just the JavaScript portion. work has already been done in the JavaScript portion in the terms of sort of automating. You can look at Josh's Unravel project for more information about that. For me, I was thinking about things more on the side of making an app that's sort of tinkering heavy and allows users to interact with the page, and in the hopes that perhaps that somehow could lead to better understanding. And so that's how all the need finding came towards creating the final project of the Sandpaper subproject. So the final thing we're going to cover, the final things that we're going to cover is user testing and limitations, followed by sort of a more in-depth dive into how some of the tech works. And the reason why I'm grouping user testing and limitations together is because this quarter, besides the initial interviewing for need finding, I was not actually able to do user testing on this prototype. It would have been nice to be able to do it. Unfortunately, since I'll be departing next quarter, there will be I won't actually be able to do any of the need finding. Although it would have been very interesting to, in my opinion, see, taking a component with JavaScript, asking people to figure out how it works with and without this Sandpaper component, and then B, asking them to recreate this component, and for each of these two subtasks, figure out exactly how long it takes users to understand the component and recreate the component after they said they understand it. And that way we can take a look at whether or not this Chrome extension actually helps further people's understanding. As far as limitations go, definitely there are probably some from a technical perspective. The examples that I've shown here earlier are, in a sense, quite simple. Almost, for these functions that exist, obviously, if you're working with a case where the page is minified and this is C and this is S and O and A, obviously that's going to be helpful. And the same goes here. But for example, one technical roadblock that I had coming up was, so one roadblock is this sort of HTML stripping. It's making the JavaScript, it's sort of breaking some of the JavaScript functions, so it doesn't totally break the functionality of the app, but it does make it a little clumsy. The other thing is, I really wanted to do an example with Facebook, but I couldn't really find a component that was easily to isolate. I thought by using this drop-down menu that I could use the Sandpaper app to figure out which JavaScript is in charge of it, but I couldn't seem to get consistent results. I tried disabling a lot of things and I couldn't get it. So either this is not JavaScript, which seems unlikely, or there must be something that I'm missing as far as functions. Maybe I can't look at just the global functions. Maybe I have to recursively pick all the functions. And so that's one limitation. So that's the second limitation. I think the third limitation is also, would be nice to have some sort of bulk action. Obviously here, with the checkboxes, I'm going sort of line by line. If I can pull it up again and disabling and re-enabling functions, it would have been nice to be able to do that in bulk or something, just sort of speed things up. I think those are the three main limitations, right? So just the HTML cutting could be a little more retuned. The second one is, I don't think we're getting all the functions. I think we're getting pretty close, but obviously we're not getting all of them. And the third is, the interface could be improved to make it easier to enable and disable these functions. Finally, to jump into the tech aspect of things, since I'm sort of short on time, I will simply say the best way to go about this is to refer to two things. One is the Sandpaper app, the GitHub repository. Right now, there's nothing here, but the README will be updated with some very in-depth technical information. The second thing to do is to go ahead and look at the source. If you look specifically at the content script, there's a lot of comments. There's a lot of comments, and there's a lot of things talking about some of the tricks that we had to do to get the content script to get this, to be able to access the namespace of the web page, to be able to pass that to the Chrome extension, and then here, right, so the content script is what does the lifting as far as inspecting the page goes, and then the panel.js is this is the code that's responsible for populating the panel and these functions here are responsible for enabling and disabling the function. So it's either pretty straightforward or there's a lot of thorough commenting. So I would say the two places to look for a tech explanation of what's going on is A, the GitHub repo, and B, the actual code itself.